Hello and welcome to another episode of the Working It Out podcast. Today we've got an amazing guest with us. She's a CEO and founder of an organisation called Fearless Women. She's the host of a podcast called the Game Changers podcast. She is a non-executive director at the London Mavericks. I've got a long list of things that I won't reel off. Do check out her LinkedIn. Today we've got the amazing Sue Anstiss. Thank you for joining us today, Sue.
Oh, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Alex.
Yeah, no, pleasure's mine as well. I've been trying to get you on for a while, so I'm really pleased to have you here. I think what we do is we jump straight into our first question, and that's about our Working It Out locker. So for those that aren't aware, this is about one item from your relationship with physical activity throughout your life, and you induct that into our locker. We've had some amazing items in the past. So one item would you like to induct in, please?
Yeah, no pressure. Amazing items in the past. Well, I've had a long lifetime of relationship with sport and physical activity, but this is what I'd like to induct. It's a very quirky, for those that are listening, swimming hat with beautiful coloured flowers, etc. An old-fashioned swimming hat. And I think it probably reflects my relationship with sport and physical activity now through that lifetime, in terms of I might have bought you something different 10, 15 years ago, but just finding the joy and the love. And that for me is something I don't wear it all the time when I'm open water swimming, but we wear it occasionally when we're swimming. So I do a lot of all-round year swimming. And I think what I get from swimming has definitely changed. What I get from sport and swimming has changed through that discovery.
That's an amazing item, and I love how colourful that is as well. It's really vibrant. I think I always say this, I really like to try to do as much digging as possible into my guests to try and find out anything about their personal relationship with physical activity. And one thing I did see was open water swimming, so I'm glad that's come up. I saw a post from your daughter on X about how you were crazy and doing it on your birthday, which is, yeah, not for me. I'm moving down to the south coast, so maybe I need to get into that. But how did your relationship with swimming start? Is it something that you did as a child and you've returned to?
Yeah, I swam as a child. I swam competitively. That was my sport as a child, was swimming, and then running, and then all the team sports, netball, etc. But yeah, swimming was the core one that it's probably to the highest level of competing in. And then I guess I've continued on as a bit of a swimmer, and I discovered triathlon in my 40s. So I got quite competitive on the triathlon side, the age group side, in my 40s and late 40s. So I think I was very competitive. I think I've quite a sporty family and a competitive family. I think that's the essence of my relationship with sport. But I think that's what's changed now in my late 50s, but it's more about doing things that I love, we're going to come and talk more about the importance of sport and physical activity, but walking, netball, yoga, open water swimming, but doing things without a Garmin on and not doing it for a time or not worrying about where I come, just doing it to enjoy it. So I think that's what's probably shifted in my swimming relationship. I did a bit of masters swimming. After I'd done the triathlon, I did some competitive masters in the nationals, which I enjoyed, but I think I feel differently about sport now.
Is that in line with your perspective in terms of professional way of thinking? Because I was trying to see a lot of the people that you interview, there is a vast mix of people between people who are highly competitive and people who are more in it for societal gains. So where does your personal interest lie in terms of physical activity? Do you see that it's more transitioned into access for everyone versus that competition?
Yeah, I think so. It is a really interesting question, because I do think over the period of the time that I've worked, I ran a sports PR agency for 25, 26 years. Mm-hmm. And we always used to say at the time, we never worked really not with elite, but we never worked in football and Formula One, and we didn't really follow the money. We were much more grassroots, mass participation campaigns. And I think that was just because I loved working in that space, and we probably saw more benefit than just making more money for rich people. So I think that historically there probably was that interest in, and I think that my involvement with Women's Sport and the Women's Sport Trust has been more about that high profile, getting more funding into sport, more visibility, role models, etc. And I feel like in the last 5-10 years I'm not disillusioned with that. I think that's still really important, but actually it's about ensuring we maintain the joy in sport for people at all levels. What I'm beginning to feel, I think probably in the last 5 years, we get so focused on pathway and development and, hey, you're in here, what team can you be in, how can you progress, that sometimes I think we begin to forget the essence of sport and community. And I talk a lot about joy, but just being with people, overcoming loneliness, having fun. And I think I've found that in sport in the last few years, and want to make sure that other people can benefit from that too, that we lose too many people on that drive for elite sport and medals, and forget that actually it's something that can be with you for life and has so many benefits. So I think it's a bit of my own personal journey that's reflected in the work that I do too.
Oh no, I completely resonate. And before my work in the This Girl Can team now, it was looking after a campaign, newish campaign called Play Their Way, all around the positive experiences for children and young people, and having the workforce understand the child's right to be able to play, develop, and learn in a way which is suitable for them, which isn't. It could be about winning medals, but it doesn't have to be about winning that. And how does a coach deliver? So this leads on quite perfectly, because I'm interested in this next section around what one emotion would you give us in terms of your relationship with physical activity. If we were going to say, let's do some physical activity, what first emotion has come to mind?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel I would say like exhilaration and excitement of physical activity, but I wonder now whether it might, and I use the word joy a lot, but whether that is, it's almost that joy and satisfaction and contentment of being, because for me now, so much of it is around friendship and being around people and almost like spending time with other people too. So I feel that's almost as important, or I'm not doing as much of a going out for solo runs, and I walk the dog a lot, but I'm not out running and training on my own, long bike rides on my own, long hours in the pool on my own. It is more of a shared experience, I would say. Yeah, I think exhilaration and joy.
Exhilaration, that's a great word. I think as it sounds like the team sport is quite important to you from a mental health perspective. Is that something that is more later on in life, or has that always been a part of what you've needed out of physical activity?
Yeah, I think I think I love netball and hockey. I love the team sport, and it's interesting that my sports were then more individual sports of the swimming and running and so on. I had a really interesting conversation with Adrian Morehouse. He's the chair of Leisure Focus. I'm on the trustee for Leisure Focus as well in Berkshire. And we were chatting just before Christmas actually about why he chose swimming. I'm sure he won't mind me sharing, but at a school where it was all about rugby and sport and getting selected or not getting selected, it was never down to you. And he discovered with swimming, actually, the faster he went, it was all down to him. He was in control. The better he trained, the more hours he put in the pool, he was going to get selected because he could do the times. And it made me reflect on, that's interesting, isn't it? That in terms of the where I had a strong pathway of success, it was more of swimming and running and then triathlon. But actually, I do love the team side, and so I don't think it was I was never on a pathway to get selected for anything with the team. I've just loved being with other people, and I enjoy that element. And now it's as much about not giving back, but we've got a lovely walking netball team that we go to once a week. But it's just so nice to meet new people and seeing what you're giving back to them also in terms of women that maybe haven't played since school or haven't played for a long time, but I get real satisfaction and happiness in what they're getting from the sport as well too.
You seem to be able to, I guess I'm perceiving it as you seem to be able to easily gain access to a wide range of different activities. Has that been the case? Have you been able to go, oh, there's this opportunity here for me that I can engage in? Or has there been times where you've not been sure how to kind of transition to something new and the struggles of that?
Yeah, I don't think I have really faced that, isn't it? And I wonder if that's just a confidence. And I think because I was quite literate in the gym. So my brothers were all into bodybuilding, did a lot of bodybuilding, and we had weights in the gym. So I think in terms of that strength training and being in a gym environment, and I studied sports science at university too. So I think although it's interesting, isn't it? I do, and like this comes up a lot in my work now at Leisure Focus, I think the gyms can still be massively intimidating for a huge proportion of the population. So we can have that conversation too, especially aligned to the work with This Girl Can and so on. So even someone who is as confident with working out in the gym, my husband's a personal trainer, I still can be really intimidated or feel intimidated going into that strange environment. But I think because I've always felt quite confident in my capabilities of I can hold my own almost. I probably haven't felt that I haven't been able to find sport or I haven't been able to shift. And even when I started doing the triathlon, that came from I was doing a year of challenges and I tried a triathlon and then I joined the local triathlon club. So I don't think been scared to step forward. But maybe that's why now I want to make sure that other people can have access in that way, because it hasn't been an issue for me, but that I'm beginning to get a little bit more aware in my late 50s that it is an issue for others too. I have always known that. So I think it's how we can make it as accessible and inviting and supportive. And that brings me great happiness as well, to know that I'm bringing people into something that I've enjoyed so much.
It seems like for the listener, I promise you we haven't been setting this up, but my day job right now and the projects I'm currently working on is in the This Girl Can team as the person looking after our project with UK Active, looking at safer gyms in terms of safer spaces to move, sexual harassment and intimidation. It's such a infuriating but exciting topic, because the insight shows that the majority of women still feel uncomfortable in that space. So not surprised that's also how you feel, even though you're saying you're confident and you're not afraid to try something new. There still is those feelings related to whether it be judgment, intimidation, sexual harassment, that still exists, and it makes it hard for people.
Yeah, I think it is. It's interesting, isn't it? I worked in the fitness industry for 15, 20 years at the beginning of the agency. So David Lloyd, Fitness First, gym group. Like, we worked for loads and loads, sport health clubs, lots of gym groups. And then there was a talk at the time about women-only spaces. And that's probably 30 years ago. I was a bit not anti-women-only spaces, but no, let's make women feel comfortable in that gym environment. But I can so see the value, and although we might not want it because we don't want a society where it's necessary, that doesn't mean to say it's not necessary, and it won't have a huge impact. And women-only swim sessions. And I guess with the work I've done with the Women's Sport Collective is creating a community and entity that is female only. And when we set that up, we had many men saying, oh, what, you're excluding men, and actually we need to integrate. And my point was, actually, if we did that, we just end up like any other sports network. The whole point of it is women only. And I can see how that also relates to sport and physical activity. And the work of Mel Bound with This Woman Run, with those initiatives. And again, from the outside, you might think, oh, that's not necessary. They should be happy and let's make them welcome. If we could make all of our clubs welcoming, we wouldn't need those women-only opportunities, venues, environments. But the fact is, that isn't what societies, that isn't what the world's the ecosystem, and make it more inclusive generally. But until that is the case, I absolutely now can see that need and the different fit. And I know even with some of the meetings, we do sport and physical activity within the Women's Sport Collective, but just even having a meeting, the different feel of women. And it isn't, we're not saying that every man that comes in is going to be offensive or disruptive or what have you. It just makes a difference when it is just women in the room. And that's because of all that women have experienced more broadly in their lives in society. It isn't about the men that might be in online or in that room, but it definitely has a very different freeing feel, I think, for women.
No, I battle with this in my head. One being a man working within the This Girl Can team and the influence, and how when we have press releases or anything, should I be the one to say, or should it be Kate above me? How strong should my voice be when this is about women empowering women? A lot of the messages, but also when we're working on the projects like the Safer Spaces to Move in the Gyms Network, I think there is a real case for women-only spaces, and I truly believe that there should be women-only spaces. That's not the answer. I think there should be women-only spaces, there should be mixed spaces, and the choice is the answer. And if a woman chooses that she wants to be in an environment where men are, I think that's where there needs to be the structures, policies in place for them to be able to exist in that environment. So completely with you, I balance between, should we focus on women-only spaces, or should we just... The whole thing around women in coaching task force, I was around before my previous team, was like, fix the system, not the women. It's around that message. So yeah, completely agree, and battle between where our focus should be. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done first, I think, with the current leisure operators in terms of their processes, policies and training around sexual harassment and intimidation for the mass. And then if the issue is still there, then maybe potentially lean heavier into women's only spaces. But yeah,
and the coaching,
so much work
I'm going to pick you up on the coaching thing there. So as a Women's Sport Collective, we've just launched a new coaching hub with Women in Sport and Sport England, and supporting that initiative. And it's had a huge, unbelievable response. The women wanting to come in and be part of a network and a club where they can talk equally and openly with women from across sport who are in the same situation as them, which is fabulous. But at the same time, as you said, there's all this work that's going on and looking at what else we need to do in terms of change, much that could be changed within the ecosystem of when the courses take place, who's on the courses, who's delivering the course. I could list them all, but huge amounts of things that need to shift to make it a better environment for women. But that's not to say a network and a place to be connected isn't also valuable, as you say. Yeah, it's about choice, and I think it's about the things running alongside. It's not black and white. It's not you either have this, get this right, or this right. And there's a lot of that, isn't there, about the whole, well, it's not women needing more confidence or women needing more, but actually if women can feel connected and feel that they're valued and they can share and they've got role models to aspire to, and I guess that's similar in the physical activity space, isn't it? To see more women like them taking part in physical activity also inspires you to know that you can do the same.
And just on the word inspiring, that brings us on to our third question. This is rolling so nicely. I shouldn't say things are rolling nicely and just let them roll nicely. I need to get better at that part, but without being so cheesy. So the third part of this introduction to yourself is around your inspirational dinner party. These are 3 guests that you're allowed to have who have inspired you throughout your life. It could be personal, professional, or someone you've seen on TV, who have inspired you throughout your life, that links to sport and physical activity. Do you have 3 people for me, please?
Can I have your answer, please?
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? So I don't like getting a bit emotional on your podcast, but I would definitely say my mum. And it's interesting with this swimming hat, because that makes me think about my mum's not here anymore. That's why I get a bit emotional and sad. But it's funny. She was a really good swimmer. And she was born in 1933. So I think about her lifetime and her experience of sport and women's sport. And she was a beautiful swimmer. But when we were young growing up, she always swam with her head out the water. Not to not spoil her hair, but that was her elegance. She was an amazing tennis player, but she played at the back line these long, graceful shots. And my dad, she used to hate playing my dad because he did all the little chips and lobs. And she would, I won't say, she used to call them little pissy shots, she used to say, because he was a squash player and hers was much more elegant. So I look at her excellence in sport, but it came from that environment at that time and she was 5'10", so she was obviously tall, very athletic. So what she might have done if she'd been around or born in this generation as an amazing basketball player or netballer or something like that. So definitely her. I'd love her, and it's almost I'd love to have her. Billie Jean King, and I'm sure many will have said that, but I think, and I have, our paths have crossed, but to have the chance to actually have dinner and sit and talk and what have you, that would be lovely. And I guess the third one is quite funny because I was with her this week. Sally Mundy massively inspires me. I never come away from a conversation with her where I don't feel I've learned stuff, and she really listens. So I feel having those 3 women together, I'd love my mum to meet Sally Mundy, and I know my mum would love to meet Billie Jean King. So yeah, whilst it's not possible, I think it's almost those would probably, and it's hard for me because obviously we've got 10,000 members in the Women's Sport Collective. There are thousands and thousands of women that inspire me every day in the work that I'm doing. But yeah, as you put me on the spot, I think I would really enjoy that dinner party.
I love those 3, and a little story about me and Sally Mundy. My first week working at Sport England, and I hadn't heard of Sally Mundy before, but I walked into the office, no one was in there. Sally was in there by herself, and she came over and said, "Hello, how are you?" And I had a talk, and then my team walked in and were like, "Why are you talking to Sally?" I was like, "Oh, she's a lovely person." They're like, "That's the CEO." I was like, I had no idea, but yeah, she was so kind and so nice, and introduced herself because it was only us 2 in the office at the time. And I had no idea. She didn't seem like the kind of CEO who was inaccessible. So yeah, she seemed like a very kind person.
Before she went to UK Sport, we first worked with her at hockey, at England and GB Hockey, and then again exactly that, just so accessible, it makes everybody feel valued and listened to, and that's certainly a very powerful trait to have in someone that is so senior in sport. Yeah.
And you said you've crossed paths with Billie Jean King.
Yeah, I think we've been in the same venues at time, but I've never really got to sit and have a lovely. Yeah, I keep trying to get her on the podcast, Alex. We all know when I podcast, I've hit that one of those goals of my big guests. So yeah.
So this is the kind of the domino effect. I've been trying to get you, and then you've been. So I've achieved that. So I feel like 2025 is going to be your year.
Thank you. I like that.
So you're trying to get Billie. So then I wonder who Billie's trying to get. Let's see if you can make that happen. So yeah, and then your mum is great. I always say that people like my mum is someone who's always inspired me as well. She's always cycled miles and miles with me to lessons when we didn't have a car, and wanted to make sure that I was getting to football sessions. So yeah, definitely, it sounds like an amazing 3. So now what we do is we transition into the second half. I tried to keep the first half just about the personal relationship with physical activity, but we have wandered off in terms of activity, and we have covered some bits which you may speak about now or not. But before we go into tackling an activity, now the listeners have found out a bit more about Sue. Could you let the listeners know what your main role is at the moment, what you focus on, and what you're currently working on?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I ran a sports PR agency for 26 years, a lot in fitness, a lot in grassroots sports. And then during COVID, co-founded the Women's Sport Collective with Kate Hannon. And there were 70 women at the time that came together online during that first lockdown just to talk and chat. And lots of them were on furlough and just to connect, really. And then on the back of that, as we came out of COVID, we thought it would be great. It had had such success, it would be lovely to expand it. And say last week we hit 10,000 members. So, and it's been free. So we've kept it all free for people, which has made a big difference, not having that friction of a fee to join. And we have online meetings and in-person, 12 regional hubs, so in-person meetings. And yeah, it's grown and thrived. So running that day to day, and as it gets bigger, it is wonderful, but it does take quite a lot to loads of WhatsApp communities and in-persons and partners and so on. And then the Game Changers podcast. So again, we do 24 episodes a year. So producing and from your side of setting them up and preparing and producing those, we do them in series of 8, so 3 series a year on those. And then I do other stuff. So I wrote a book in 2021. It was published. So Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport. So that was almost written during COVID when I got my thoughts together on the growth of women's sport and what we were experiencing. And then from that, I made a documentary that was on Netflix and is now on Sky Sports as of a couple of weeks ago. So same name, Game On. And another documentary called Bump in the Road that followed a Bristol rugby player through pregnancy and returning to play. And so I think the documentaries and the book really are things I just love to do, but they're not, I wouldn't say they're part of my day job almost. They're bits on, and we have, we eventually covered some costs through a kind investor funded the Abbey documentary, and we got some money from Netflix, but we haven't made money on any of the documentaries or any of the content or the book. But that isn't why I've done them, really. I've done them because I wanted to help drive change and to make some really lovely making stuff. So I really enjoyed making those things too. But it's the podcast and the documentary. I should say it's really interesting. You haven't really asked me this, but I'm going to share it anyway.
Please do.
But it's on so I made Game On, and obviously it went on Netflix for a year, and that was fantastic. And it's really quite sexy to say you've got a film on Netflix. It was lovely, and lovely for Ben and Jack. So Ben and Jack, 2 amazing guys, young guys that I work with to create it. So Jack's the co-director and co-producer with me, and Ben's director of photography, and they've worked on other documentaries too. But we were really excited to have it on Netflix, and it did well on Netflix. But now it's gone on Sky, it's so different, the impact that it's having. And partly that is because Sky are doing more, I think, to push it and promote it, and it's on very regularly. Also because people are watching Sky Sports, they're already in a place where they're thinking about sports. So it's almost like you wouldn't really find an audience necessarily we now see on Netflix that would come and find a women's sports documentary. But also, I've had these most amazing messages from men saying, oh my God, I've seen your documentary and it's changed the way I feel about my girls' football team that I coach, or can you come and help? And anyway, so that's been really impactful for me, because that is why we made it in the first place. Was actually, I didn't think a man would necessarily sit and read the whole of my book, but if he sat down watching something and then he watches this hour that opens his mind to the history of why women's sport is where it is and what needs to change and some of the inequalities that still exist in an entertaining 1 hour. Yeah, so it's been really gratifying to see that impact. So those are the things I guess I do. I love the Women's Sport Collective and the connecting and the building those connections and other women being inspired by others in leadership roles. So trying to get more balance in sport is my overall ambition. If I was to answer your question you put at the start, the overall ambition is more women in leadership and a better gender balance across sport. And I guess all of it is feeding into that, but the making of content is something that makes me really happy.
I can completely see why, maybe not for myself, because this is tackling activities is my thing, but then also barriers and motivations for women is something which I've always had a personal interest in. But for my friends who, like they said, they wouldn't go to Netflix, they may, for a documentary like that, it wouldn't be in their algorithm. But it wouldn't be in their algorithm, it would just be The Office or something like that. But then if you're on Sky, there's so many of my friends who just sit at home on a Sunday when there's nothing to do, and if it's on there, they would just watch it, and then you would get those kind of messages. And it's always funny listening to my friends when they do things like that, because they'll put a message quite a vulnerable message out in the WhatsApp group to say, has anyone seen that documentary? And as if am I going to get ripped? Am I going to get ripped for saying this, or people? And then everyone's like, oh no, yeah, that was really good. You don't really get to see that. The guys don't really post out external about those kind of things.
Well, that's when I've had some of these messages. I've shared a couple of them with Jonathan Lick, like the head of Sky Sports. I've sent a couple of them on because I think maybe they don't see those things too. It's just to say, the impact that you're having because of what you're putting in people's front rooms almost, that you're getting that message out to them. That it's so important, and for me it's that impact of that they watch that. Will that then change how they behave towards their wives and girlfriends and daughters and girls playing sport and the people they're coaching, and as fans of sport it can change them on so many levels. So yeah, that's a bit that's exciting. And then their attitudes to women and girls generally. It's not just about sport. For me it's that the whole of my driver is that it's the bigger sport's the vehicle through which I hope that change will come, but ultimately it's about how men and boys treat women and girls within society, and I think sport's got a big part to play there.
So I feel this may be part of the next answer, but I'm not going to guide you down any ways. So the second half, the final question as well, because it's a chunky one, is around if you were going to tackle an activity, where do your thoughts start and what would you focus on? So I'll leave that as broad there, and then we can narrow down throughout the conversation. How would you start the process?
Yeah, it is interesting because I think years ago, or not even years ago, I do feel that whole role models, if I think, and on my space is very much women and girls, so I will set my stall out there. I think that whole, the Lioness is the inspiration, the high level, and I do still believe there's been a massive input and growth and activity as a result of a Lionesses win and the Euros in 22. And I hope, I'm doing a lot of work around the Women's Rugby World Cup. I hope that we'll see the same in women's rugby in other sports too. And Keely Hodgkinson, and amazing women doing amazing things, definitely does have an impact. However, I think what I've maybe grown up to or seen more of, there is sometimes a thought that can put women off, because actually that's not me. I'm never going to run at that pace of Paula Radcliffe. I'm never going to do anything at that level. Therefore, I won't even bother because I'm not like that. So it's that balance, I think, of role models to inspire, and they all talk, don't they? Inspire the next generation. I think that is really important. But for me now, I think it is more about access and opportunity and inclusion and all those things at a grassroots in the playground. I think that's probably where not my view has changed. I think I have always thought that a bit, but even more so now as I've looked at the clothing that, that whether it's netball skirts and skirts for girls in PE, whether it's boys playing football and dominating in the playground, whether it's girls turning up at the rugby club and fun on the crappy pitches at different times. So it's almost like all of those elements. I think probably there's one word, it would be access. I think that we say there's access, but is there really access, and how welcoming is that for girls? And that obviously was that big dropout around teenagers too. There's not really one, but I guess in my head I've moved further down the pyramid, and I think I probably always was, the importance of grassroots, but I think even more so now. I think changes that enable far more to do far more, and also then, and I come back to where I started, that whole not necessarily about the pathway, but recognizing that a girl or a young boy might just want to play sport and love it forever. And actually, I want them to love it forever. I don't want to love it and get on a British cycling to something amazing and then absolutely hate the sport by the time they're 17, 18, hit championships, what have you, and never want to go on a bike again. I want a young woman to want to cycle forever. So I think that's where I've changed, is how do we, yes, we want a pathway, we want medals and all that comes with that. But actually what we want is people to love physical activity and sport and community and overcome loneliness and all those things for the rest of their lives, not just those younger ages.
No, completely agree. And I think this is where the unfair part of the podcast comes in, because we talk around access as a topic. You've listed some amazing things here, but what I try to do with all of our guests is narrow us down to something which the person is not necessarily the one where, but if we can, fantastic. But more around the one thing that my guest is personally passionate about. So you've spoken here around access, and then underneath that you've said play and they love it, but then you've also spoken around the opportunities and PE and the like PE kit. So is there something which, if you were going to focus on, you had that pot of money to say, I'm going to work on this part of access, is there something that you would put time and energy in?
You know what? There are many, and I'm not answering you. There are many things, and I think that's often the way. Is it's complicated and it's not one thing. I might say coaches. I might say women. Getting more women there to coach girls, getting PE teachers upskilled to encourage girls, having more clubs, having more female coaches, and then I would say women in the pathway, inspiring and being seen there as leaders and coaches of high level sport, both men's and women's. Because I think for lots of women and girls, it does make a difference to have a woman that's coaching you and inspiring you and understanding you, especially for girls going through puberty as well too. I think so if I was to change one thing right now, I think it would probably be around coaches, both volunteer and professional, and trying to redress, because I think we've had such success at sport in so many areas of funding and teams and access, but actually it's still only whatever it is, 10 to 12% of Olympic and Paralympic coaches are female in the performance, and not that's the only thing to affect it, but it then filters right the way down, I think, across the coaching pathway. And ultimately, it's coaches. And so many people I've talked on the podcast is about who brought you into sport. Oh, it was a PE teacher that built a love of sport. We're enabling those PE teachers to do more. Coaches, women as coaches, feeling there's a place for them in the coaching structure.
So just a bit, the play their way anecdote on that. When we, obviously, the majority of coaches are male, but when we started play their way in the message around child first coaching, which is based around children's rights and how you can create an environment for a child which isn't go out in a field and just run about and have fun. It's still structured learning and development, but with the child in mind. The actual audience that we've seen on social media has been a higher percentage of women, and have been engaging in the content because they understand and those skills that are needed and are willing and able to implement them, where a lot of, I believe, the older men have more traditional, older skills and techniques. Yeah. So it's really interesting to say we want to be doing child first coaching, and those who are resonating most and say they're able and willing are women in the workforce. So you're completely right. Maybe we definitely do need more women in the workforce for a number of reasons, but also for this new philosophy that we're saying is beneficial.
And actually it's beneficial for all also, because I do feel there's very much that autocrat, like as we get more senior, we need men in because they're on more, is that typical leadership of slightly more aggressive and leading for the front, and but actually the women that have built up, they often, I'm thinking of someone like Giselle Mather, who did amazing work at London Irish at the Academy with Jonathan Joseph and loads of amazing young rugby players, and it's almost we'll leave the women looking after the younger athletes and whatever, the nurturing, and then by the time they get to here, we'll bring the men in, the high paid jobs in the PWR clubs, bring in the men. But actually by the time they got to that stage, the jobs less important. It's the work's been done at that lower level of bringing on skill set and the attitude to sport, etc. And it's in many cases it's the women that have done that. So I think it's absolutely at all levels that we need to see more women coaches progressing.
And my previous manager, Stuart Armstrong, he was a big advocate for saying the way that coaches are recognised is flawed, because it is like the level at the top means you have to be performance pathway. But he's like, no, actually, being on a field on a Saturday managing 12 children who's different development levels and different strengths and skills is challenging, because they may not even want to be like, at the higher level. They want to be there the majority of the time. So he was always an advocate for that. So we've got we're focusing you down. We're saying women in the workforce, women coaching, and the difference they make. What's your thoughts on how to get more women in the workforce, how to get more women coaches, and how would you approach doing that?
I think it's interesting because there is this work going on at the moment anyway. I feel like I'm like a advert for Sport England, the work that you're funding with women in sport at the moment, but there is a work around the task force, and so it is in those different levels. It is around, I think, the role model. I think role models is really important. And we name a female coach, people might go, Hope Powell or Emma Hayes. There's not very many of them. So I think it is about more role modelling and celebrating those amazing women. We've got 6 fabulous patrons for our coaching task force. And anyway, I'm going to jump a little bit and come back. we wanted 2 or 3 patrons for the coaching task force. We approached 6 women. They were the first 6 women that we approached. They all came back and said yes. On the same day, they all said, we would love to be patrons. And that's so different, isn't it? So that whole women wanting to support other women is so powerful. So I think that role models and inspiration is important. There's lots of stuff that's going to be so hard to move, which is the whole, we appoint people like ourselves, who's in the decision-making positions, in those panels, choosing who the next performance director is, who's choosing who the next head coach is, etc. So that people appointing people that they know. I think there's loads of challenges. Women in football, there's specific challenges because there aren't many ways a woman, if you're coaching women's football, can be a professional coach at the moment. You might be full paid in the WSL, but in the Championship, they're not all fully paid. And that's only, 20 teams. Whereas as a man, you could be a professional football coach across loads and loads of levels of the pyramid. So it's harder for women to step forward and say, I've been a professional football coach. So I think there's a structural pieces that needs to change. There's a how we recruit people. Coming back to that thing about, do we need more female only? I hear horror stories of women turning up at level 4, level 5, whatever, coaching, and they're the only woman with 30 men, and how that makes you feel. And some women are happy to come along and do that, but for others, all that great. So I'm not giving you one answer because I think there are lots of elements. And then it's the balance of what does a coach mean? What do we have? Is that an appealing role for anybody to be away from your home for 300 nights a week if you're on an elite pathway? Actually, is there more that we could be doing in terms of supporting our coaches, male and female, sharing roles, etc., etc.? So I'm giving you one answer because there are lots of different things to look at. I missed 4 or 5 things there, but
I always do this, and this is where it goes back to fully understand that everyone very top conceptually at the top, and I do really unfairly whittle people down because it makes it sound like Sue's only interested in role models, and that's not what I'm trying to do at all. It's more just the listeners understanding what you personally are like passionate about. So so we've got role modelling here. We spoke about that quite a bit, and so what it means to be a coach. This structural issues. Is there anything within, say, the structural issues that that either women in sport or you feel Sport England or the sector should be working on that doesn't currently exist?
Well, I think there are many things, and some sports are doing it well. So if you look at World Rugby and what they did with the last Rugby World Cup and what they're doing now, it's almost like stipulating, like a code. Actually, if you've got this team, you need to have a male and female in each of your teams at each of your levels. Or I'm not really for quotas in terms of I'd like them not to have to exist, but my goodness, they work, as we know, with the Code for Sports Governance from Sport England. So actually saying, if you're going to get this funding, you need a male and female coach, or you at least need an active female in your coaching setup. So then, and I remember talking to World Rugby about this before the last World Cup. And at the end of that, you've got 12 amazing women who can say they've been to a World Cup and they've worked in a coaching team and they've got more opportunities. So I definitely think there is more of a stating that if we're going to have this, you need to have this too, and they need to be equal. So putting some of that policy in place, I think. And people are able to do that. That is in their gift to do that if they're running an organisation, but often they wouldn't do that. But yeah.
I think it's quite an interesting one, like you say, the quota and the Code for Sports Governance. I think that's when you see the diversity and inclusion action plans. Some are really embracing it. Some organisations, they seem to be saying this is what we've needed, this to push us through to the next level. And it feels to me that it's an exercise to get the funding, but I feel like even with that, it's a great first step. How do you go to being just naturally part of an organisation's culture? That's the part which I feel is some organisations are going to struggle with.
And I guess
because it's always going to feel like it comes funding related.
With all these things, it comes to success, doesn't it? So if you did give those women equal access, equal hours, equal access to the players, equal funding, whatever, then they'll have success. Then there's no way they won't be as successful. There's no reason that they shouldn't be as successful. They may be more successful than your male coaches. So I think once you then have that success, then it's easy, because actually, why would you not? You've doubled your pool of people that could become coaches, performance directors. You've made it more accessible. So I think, but you need to redress the balance first of all and make it fair. And it's not fair. And actually, in terms of equity, you need to invest more and more courses and more access to begin to redress that balance. It's not just about equality. It's about making sure we get to a point where there is equal access and opportunity. So I'd like to believe that eventually, and I think that's the same we could come on to talk about funding of women's sport, etc. I think it needs to be addressed. But when you then get there, then the brands will benefit as much, and they will see the benefit of supporting and sponsoring women's sport in the same way. But someone needs to put something in place to create that shift. It's not going to happen naturally, and if it does, it's going to take another 100 years. So we need to put something in place to move it along faster.
As you said, we'll come on to funding of women's sport, so I'm going to jump straight in there and see what specifically you mean by that, and what you're passionate about in terms of more funding towards women. Is it this workforce piece, or is it more in general access for activity and everything?
Yeah, I jumped off a bit there. I think for me,
That's fine.
my passion is about workforce. It's about more women in those rooms where the decisions are being made. So that's what I think. And we've all got an opportunity to shift and create a bit of change, haven't we? But I think you can't do it all. And I'm really passionate about women and girls and clothing, sports science, coaching. Like, there's so many different areas. But I think if I had to pick my sweet spot of where I feel the work that I do now with the Game Changers and the Women's Sport Collective and standing up and speaking out for women, it is around enabling women to be in positions where decisions are being made. And that may be in terms of board roles in governance, but also in those senior teams at the top table. So when someone says, shall we put this on at this time, or shall we spend this on this or this, there's more of a balance decision making. It's not just people, and not men making the wrong decisions in a cruel way, but just because they haven't even thought, they've never been through that, they've never experienced that. And that's around facilities and right down. And I know there are some amazing women doing a lot of work in this space, but in making playing environments inclusive for women. If a man's not had daughters even, or he's clearly never been through female puberty, understanding what that means to girls. So having women in those senior decision-making positions who have lived as a women can make a real difference to what then happens throughout a sport. So that's my ambition, is to make sure we've got more women recognised and so in those senior positions, but also in terms of funding. That then, anyway, without going off on one, but I look at what's happening at the moment with the 100. We've had all these amazing bids on the 100 teams. This is what we just come out of that. These huge amounts of money, and whether it is around ego and it's these investors coming in. We're not talking about women. The 100 is equally men's and women's teams. And I've heard so little about the female teams and the focus on females, etc., around the conversation around the 100. And there's female investors that I know that have tried to get involved there, but not really been as involved as they'd like to have been, not been as embraced in the process as they'd like to have been. So the danger is it just ends up being more, because the money's come from the men, and those men see that as a powerful piece to be involved with. It just continues on where we have been in the past, which is slightly frustrating because actually it is about money and funding that's needed to enable those things to happen. So yeah, I won't name them, but some big male investors at the moment that have invested across sport in football clubs and cycling and sailing, you can know who I'm talking about. But I do think, goodness me, can you imagine if he'd have taken all that money and said, what I want is better equity and equality in society. I'm going to put all my money in female sport. I'm going to only invest in teams if they equally invest in the female side. I've got investing in this cycling team, they need to have a female equivalent, and this, but people haven't. So that's what I guess I'm hopeful of, is will more money come in with somebody that's really passionate about helping to address that balance? Because for all that we do on a grassroots level, without funding, ultimately, that does make it more challenging. And I do think, because I guess someone might listen to this and think, why should guys or organisations be funding women's sport? I don't want it to be like it's a worthy thing, you need to be doing this. So the other thing is, women's sport needs to prove, and all the amazing stuff that the Women's Sport Trust does in terms of sharing its research and data around the growing audience and the impact, and what it does for sponsors to be sponsoring women's sport versus sponsoring the men's sport. So we need to better tell that story and all the amazing social impact that these athletes are having in terms of the visibility on social media and the reach and the engagement that they get versus men's sport. So I think part of our job as women's sport, if that's is to better tell that story. So it isn't just you can pay this much money to sponsor this and you'll get this, or sponsor, because actually at the moment, in many cases, it does still in the favour of men's sport in terms of eyeballs and those traditional metrics of how we measure the success of sport. So that's a balance and the challenge. And yet I also feel we do need to address 100 years of inequality to get to that place where it is substantial and worth investing in.
From a women's sport collective, so 10,000 members, which is crazy. How do you collate or what are you doing to collate all the amazing insight and success stories and impact? How are you doing that with 10,000 women?
Such a good point. Such a good question, Alex. That's what Kate and I often ask ourselves. So it is a challenge because, of 10,000 women out there, and of the membership. So about a third are non-exec directors, CEOs, very senior, top level. There's about a third that middle management, and a third that are either first role in or PhD or etc. coming into the sector, and it's pretty much stayed that way for 5 years. That right from the start, that's as we recruited women initially, and that's where they stayed. So we do talk, obviously, and through Sport England, we show our impact and the impact that we're having, not just in numbers and metrics of this many people came to our meetings or this many people have made connections. I'm at Quins tonight at the rugby, and I know women will approach me and say, I'm a member of the collective, and through this, I've met this, and I've got this job, and I've been introduced to her. And so we are hearing that in person all the time and online and so on. So we do try to tally that up. And a question back for you, isn't it? How should we be managing and reflecting this? And some of it is just the case studies. I could take 5 women, I won't give you exact examples of, but women who approached me recently and said, the difference it's made to their lives, their careers, the how they feel connected to the industry, the knowledge they've learned. And then and for me, it's that ripple as well, isn't it? So you're having a positive impact for a woman who then goes on to have a positive impact for others in her team, and that she might be coaching or that she's influencing. So yeah, I don't really have an answer for how we do measure the impact, and we're looking at other kind of social purpose tools. Are there tools that we can, in terms of getting a real error on the collective? And then a bit of me feels, I probably shouldn't admit this to you, Alex, is I know how impactful it is actually, and do we need to measure it and keep telling people, or actually if people keep going and telling other people, and we work so hard to make sure that the membership's up to date, people that it really is people that are members of the collective, and we're constantly deduping and updating emails. If all those people, even if half of those people are finding value from it and telling others, and our research shows us that a huge percentage feel more confident about working in the industry, they found out about other jobs in the industry, they've got jobs through the collective too. So I've got those kind of numbers and stats from the research each year that show me that's the case. But it is that anecdotal, quite emotional when people write to us or tell us the difference that it's made too. But yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting thing because it is a bit more ephemeral. It's quite hard to tangibly say their salaries have gone up this much, and because the sector doesn't measure, and there is some research now, isn't there? But in terms of there's less women on boards than there was a few years ago. But and sport's so broad, we've got women that are from coaches and scientists and broadcasters through to CEOs and activists and working in brand agencies and working in brands. And it's quite hard to see where the shift in gender equality is happening because the sector is so broad. It's not like it's just NGBs or it's just those working within sports leagues and teams. So it's hard to say, through our work, we've now got 20% more women or there's more opportunities on boards. No, you got me there. It was a long answer because it is something, it's really important, but for as long as we feel we know it's having impact, sometimes it can be a challenge to illustrate that.
I think that's a beautiful place to stop, because I think that the part which I'm still doing is the name of the podcast around working it out. I don't think there's ever going to be one answer. It's an ever evolving thing. I always ask the unfair questions of how are we demonstrating impact? What's your one thing going to be? But it's never going to be that. It's not that simple. So which you've explained very well, but also demonstrated that this is just ever evolving, and it's not potentially. I like the answer of, we don't need to always evidence impact because you should know it, you should see it, it's there. Yeah. So I could go on for another hour talking to you, but I can't keep you that long. So thank you very much for joining me today.
It's been a real pleasure. I feel like I've talked about things I've only had in my head and not talked about before. So thank you for giving me that opportunity as well, Alex.